Good morning. It's my privilege to introduce our next conversation with Noah Rothman, who's a senior writer at the National Review, and he'll be having a conversation with someone that I've been privileged to know for, I guess, close to 30 years now. Asa Hutchinson grew up on a farm in northwest Arkansas. He went on to become the youngest person ever appointed U.S. Attorney by President Ronald Reagan. Served in Congress, served at high levels in the Department of Homeland Security, and as my congressman in the 3rd District of Arkansas. But more recently, he served 2 terms as the governor of Arkansas, did a fantastic job. One thing that really stands out to me about Asa Hutchinson is that he's a man with wisdom. And what makes him stand out in politics today is that no matter who you are, and no matter how categorically you disagree with him, he'll always take the time to genuinely listen to your point of view and think it over. Asa ran for president last year. Unfortunately, he didn't win. But it's my privilege and my honor to introduce to you Governor Asa Hutchinson, the man I wish was president of the United States.
Governor, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to Principals First for having us. I think we should start with a big 30,000-foot overview of the political landscape. You were probably, I think it's safe to say, the most Trump-skeptical person to run for the GOP nomination in 2024. You sort of foresaw some of the problems that we might experience in a second Trump administration. We're a month into it. How's it going?
Well, I can say, first of all, I guess I should. I should say that if I would have had a crowd like this in Iowa, I might be president of the United States. So, what an impressive group. And then, secondly, it's nice to come to a conference that the Proud Boys are not trying to get into. So, with that, in terms of, I did run for president because I believe we ought to go a different direction. Obviously, not enough people agreed with me on that, and President Trump got elected, and there really is not very many surprises in terms of what he is doing and his agenda because it's what he ran on. In the same sense, the warnings that I sounded and others sounded, they have also exceeded expectations. In other words, he's lived up to those warnings as well. And everything that we said in terms of autocracy, in terms of revenge, in terms of the United States going it alone, in contrast to building a trust relationship with our allies, all of that has come to happen. Now, there is a surprise, though, from what he campaigned on, and that is whenever he announces that the United States should own Gaza. Now, you think about that. This was the isolationist presidential candidate. He's the one that wanted to withdraw from foreign entanglements and foreign engagements and foreign interventions, and what he is saying in reference to Greenland, Panama, and Gaza and the Middle East is totally contrary to his whole premise for running for president. And I think that has been a surprise, and it should be a surprise to his base.
So let's go to foreign policy, since you've introduced that. Obviously, Ukraine is in the news, and the negotiations in Riyadh and with and without Ukraine, I think, have been pretty disgraceful. The degree to which the Pentagon under Donald Trump is full of people who are restrainers, right, skeptical of American hegemonic obligations abroad and want to pare that back. That's not necessarily what Donald Trump ran. As you say, he's mercurial about this. Sometimes he wants to expand American territories. Sometimes he wants to withdraw from American conflicts. It seems we're seeing more, the manifestation is pressure on allies, rapprochement with enemies. Is that what you anticipated?
You know, I probably didn't anticipate it to the depth that he has carried it. And first of all, I knew whenever he says he wants to end the Ukraine-Russian conflict within 24 hours, the only way you do that is to give Putin what he wants. And that I warned about that at the time, and that is coming not just to happen, but at an accelerated pace and in a method that enhances the power of a dictator and rewards Russia for their bad conduct. And whenever I look at the United States of America and our history of building goodwill with our allies and having the relationships for our Western democracies that value freedom, value sovereignty, and value partnerships, that is being eroded today. And instead of it being an America First agenda, it becomes an America Alone agenda. And that is not good for our country. Whenever you look at the fact that the Marshall Plan after World War II, that we rebuilt Europe, and we did that because it was the right thing to do, and the world saw a United States of America that was not acting for what they can get out of conflict, but how they can enhance freedom with the conflict. And today, to see President Trump saying we want to have the mineral interest of Ukraine, this is a travesty that does not reflect well on the goodness of America.
My boss, Ramesh Ponnuru at National Review, suggested that some of the efforts on the part of the Trump administration to extract resources, for example, from our partners in exchange for our support, to say nothing of territorial expansionism, is sort of a cartoon of what an imperialist power would behave like, a caricature. What can a Congress, a less pliant Congress, do to constrain a president from pursuing a foreign policy that departs from our traditional values, or even a pretty objective assessment of U.S. interests? Is there anything?
Well, and that's the challenge that, you know, the executive branch, the president is commander-in-chief. He has more flexibility in our foreign policy than the legislative branch, and he doesn't have the same constraints. Now, obviously, he does when you're talking about declaring war, whenever you're talking about appropriations, there is some checks and balances there. And I have a fundamental belief that the Republican members of the United States Senate particularly, they understand the importance of our engagement with our allies, the trust relationship, and the fact that you've got to contain Russia. So there's an understanding there, and I think there's some lines that cannot be crossed. They're giving great flexibility, and they haven't asserted themselves yet, but I am optimistic that they will at the right time. And maybe it's becoming very, very soon. So, yes, that is worrisome. There should be also some internal checks and balances. I'm watching Secretary of State Marco Rubio. For somebody who understands the importance of what we do globally to support Israel, that our support of Ukraine has been critical, containment of Russia, all of this. These are things that Marco Rubio understands, and yet he's having to go and negotiate on behalf of the Trump administration and to pull punches and try to explain why Ukraine's not involved in this. He's got to feel very, very uncomfortable. And so there's going to be tension within the administration, as there should be, and I hope that conviction and principle will overcome other accommodations.
So when it comes to checking the administration, let's turn to domestic policy. A couple of weeks ago, the vice president, the president's allies, and media were flirting with the notion that maybe we should ignore the courts. Let's say the courts just do something we don't like, and there's a very unambiguous effort to evade responding to a court decision. Not we're seeking relief. There's no other avenues to challenge something. The Supreme Court has had its say, and the president were to say, no, now you will go enforce it, Jacksonian style. What kind of response would you like to see from the body politic to that abrogation of constitutional propriety? And how would that response, do you anticipate, depart from what your ideal response would be?
Well, I mean, first of all, the body politic, whether you're talking about the members of Congress or the administration, it should be clear that this administration will follow the rulings of the court, particularly the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, let's analyze this a little bit. First of all, you know, the ripest case is the firing of the special counsel that had investigative responsibilities for whistleblowers, protective responsibilities for them. The president fired the special counsel, and the law provided protections for him that he could not be fired except for malfeasance, irresponsibility, and for cause, basically. It was contested. The lower courts entered a restraining order saying he can't be fired under those circumstances. The Trump administration took it to the United States Supreme Court. You all know this. It just happened yesterday. And the court said it's not right for us to hear it yet. But it was, I read the decision yesterday, and watch Justice Barrett Comey. Watch her. And I think she will be a pivotal judge as to how these cases proceed. And you had that returned, but the question will be whether the Trump administration will follow the rulings of the lower courts. I do believe they will follow the rulings of the Supreme Court when they issue a final ruling. And the Solicitor General, the Justice Department is saying the right thing, that we will follow the instructions of the court. But the test will be, will Trump actually do it, what he's saying he will do now? And so we're not in a constitutional crisis because the Trump administration has said we will follow the rulings of the court. But we could be if the body politic does not stand firm on that. And so that's a long analysis, but we're not there yet. But we need to be clear, just as I was as governor. The courts came down with a ruling we weren't particularly happy with, but I said we're going to comply with the rulings of the court. And that's been the history of leadership in the country.
That's a great and measured take, and yeah, deserves it. It's a measured take. It seems that the administration isn't trying to foster that kind of measured take in people. You're getting up, you know, they're drinking from a fire hose with this administration. How do you assess everything it's doing, properly contextualize it, say this is something worth getting my hair on fire, this is not? What's the most consequential thing that we've seen so far?
All I can do is give you my perspective, and I'm going to give you some pluses and minuses here. And the minuses are more constitutionally and principle concerning. But in terms of the positives that I've been amazed with is, first of all, President Trump has set a higher standard for the first 100 days of being in office as a newly elected president. And seriously, subsequent presidents are going to be measured by the speed and the action that President Trump has been trying to enact his agenda. And
oh, no, that's absolutely right. The next Democratic president will have to have a suite of executive orders or else they're going to be unfavorably compared to Donald Trump.
Right, it's the speed of it. I mean, I've been through the confirmation process. Whenever you look at the Biden administration, some of their appointees did not get confirmed over the 4 years of his administration. You've got to speed up that process from the executive branch, and he's certainly been an active. Secondly, he's hardened our border security. I think that is a positive thing. And certainly there's going to be some results that is going to be what we perceive as failure of due process and unfair and inhumane. But in terms of hardening our border security, the American public elected him to do that, and he's done that. There's going to be a lot of difficulties ahead in that regard, but he's moved quickly on that. And then thirdly, he has elevated the presidency over the federal bureaucracy. And that's something that governors want to be able to do, presidents want to be able to do. They want to be able to run the executive branch of government. Now, you got to do it in accordance with law, and that's where the problem comes in. But he has asserted himself in those three areas. Now, the negative is that Trump, as I've already mentioned, has squandered the goodwill and trust that America has built up over the last 100 years with our friends and our allies. It's been our calling card, the goodness of America, and he has abandoned our friends for 30 pieces of silver in some cases. And so that is a concern. The second concern is that he has supported the oppressor versus the oppressed. And of course, I'm speaking of Russia and Ukraine. And for the United States of America to align itself with the oppressor versus the oppressed is against the values of our country. Another great concern I have is that Trump is continuing down the path of disregarding our deficit and our national debt. And it's illustrated. I support the controlling of the waste and bureaucracy that we see and some of the waste of spending, but now they're talking about giving stimulus checks back to Americans based upon the savings that DOGE has. My goodness, we talk about eliminating waste in government so we can reduce our national debt and our deficit. That should be the objective, and they're not talking about that the way they should. And then finally, and I'll leave it back to you in a second, and this is important, President Trump has diminished the rule of law in America. As a former United States attorney, as someone who worked in the Department of Justice, I am troubled, I am flabbergasted, I'm amazed at the direction of the Department of Justice that the case against Mayor Eric Adams should be dismissed. That is wrong. Fundamentally, it disregards our system of justice, and then you have the heavy weight of the Department of Justice coming down to make that happen. That's a disregard for the rule of law in our country. And there is a worrisome picture ahead. President Trump, because the Supreme Court gave him immunity, believes he is the law. Secondly, when you see the White House directive that the White House staff can communicate to the Department of Justice on ongoing cases, you combine those two things and you have an imperial presidency that can be misused and can disregard the rule of law. Those are concerns that I have, that he's eliminated, that one, our checks and balances between the legislative branch and the executive branch has been diminished, but it's also the internal checks within the executive branch that historically has been helpful, and that's the Department of Justice, and the rule of law has been undermined.
Let's explore that contradictory impulse there that you outlined, sort of a desire to integrate a limited government philosophy with this imperial presidency, both of which are mutually exclusive. So let's talk a little bit about Elon Musk. So if I were to be as charitable as I possibly could towards DOGE, the thing that it has done well is scandalize the country, and the Republican Party in particular, around the sort of stuff that the GAO does on an annual basis. It's something of a redundancy, which doesn't spell, success for a project that is supposed to eliminate redundancies from the federal government. Nevertheless, scandalizing around stuff, getting rid of bloat, waste, good. At the same time, the man is incredibly inconstant, a reckless communicator online, capricious to a degree that is off-putting, and in my view, risks undermining the popularity, or at least making people skeptical of, the cause of limited government. Is DOGE and Elon Musk a net benefit or detriment to small government conservatism?
I think the verdict is still out on that particular point. But what is clear is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have a lot of things in common, and one of them is they're full of conflicts of interest in the work that they're doing. and so, I think America is still studying Elon Musk on this, and there's a lot that America likes when it comes to trying to deflate a bloated bureaucracy, but they're also coming to the conclusion that the common concern of individuals is being disregarded. I reduced, as governor of Arkansas, state government employment by 3,000 workers, which is a 14% reduction over 8 years. That's a significant reduction in the state bureaucracy. Now, the key thing, though, is I didn't fire anyone. We set up a hiring freeze. We didn't bring people in when they left. We said, can we do this more efficiently? And so there's ways to shrink the federal bureaucracy without trampling on human dignity. And so Elon Musk needs to be more transparent. Secondly, he needs to avoid the conflicts of interest, which are very difficult. And thirdly, any savings should go to reduce the debt. And then finally, this is very important, he needs to abandon threats and retribution. Whenever you see him with his pocketbook talking about some judge that disagrees with him ought to be impeached, or whether he threatens members of Congress that if you don't carry out Trump's agenda, my pocketbook's going to be against you in the primary. This undermines his work as a fair arbiter of shrinking the federal government. And secondly, it's just wrong for America and what we're trying to do.
Agreed. We're running out of time, so let's talk briefly about the opposition. We had a CBS News poll, I think it was last weekend, found that the sentiments that prevailed in the wake of Donald Trump's inauguration, that Democrats were looking for ways to work with him, a majority of Democrats were looking for ways to work with him, that has evaporated. Combine that with the fact that we had a Quinnipiac survey, which also found that in the space of 2 years, Democrats have gone from majority supporting Democrats in Congress to only 9% of Democrats supporting Democrats in Congress. The Democratic rank and file is very frustrated with the slow pace of what they see as opposition, ineffectual opposition to Donald Trump. Now, the Democratic Party's strategy, as far as I understand it, institutionally, is not make any sudden movements, wait for the president to make a mistake and exploit it. That has not been wearing well with the Democratic Party writ large. Do you think the Democratic institutional strategy to resisting Donald Trump, being very circumspect and awaiting their moments, which seems to be frustrating their constituents, is the best approach? Or should they take a more active approach?
You know, James Carville just said, sit back and let it happen. And I sort of lean a little bit toward that for a while. I think they got to pick their fights. America has not abandoned Donald Trump on border security, on shrinking the size of the federal government, on, making sure that women can compete with women in women's sports. I mean, those are things that they like in what's happening here. And so, Governor Janet Mills, I don't think picked the right fight the other day, and I like her. I've worked with her, but picking a fight on males ought to be able to compete with women in women's sports is not the right fight for the Democratic Party. So I think they ought to be circumspect, pick the fight, and I think my goodness, he's still on his second honeymoon. He had a first honeymoon in his first term, so this is his second honeymoon, and so you've got to let his true colors emerge more to a greater extent. And so, yes, they need to be the loyal opposition, but I think they need to pick their fight and pick their time, and I think their base ought to be a little bit more patient with it. The voices they don't need to, Chuck Schumer, I don't think he's the voice. Maxine Waters, I don't think is the voice out there. They need to have Democratic governors that make some sense, that will be speaking for middle America and will reflect a different point of view and a different direction, but I think that's where they ought to engage the fight.
Very much. Lastly, Governor, when you were at the Republican Party nominating convention over the summer, it was only a couple days after the first assassination attempt at Donald Trump, ABC News reporter came up to you and asked if you were going to vote for the man. And you said the following: "I made some comments about not voting for a convicted felon, but that seems like a long time ago." Did you vote for him?
Well, that was a reflective moment. And you should never be reflective when you're talking to the national media, perhaps. Maybe that's a lesson
right
that,
now.
yeah. But I was reflective because, you know, during the debate, I was clear in my response that I would not support a convicted felon for President of the United States. I said that on national television in a national debate, and I said it because I believe in the rule of law. And whenever 36 jurors find Donald Trump have committed serious offenses of a variety of means, that reflects leadership that we don't need in our country. But I was reflective and said, that seemed like a long time ago, because I was surprised that our base, the Republican base, did not express the same level of outrage and concern. And so it was almost rendered ineffective. And so I was reflective on that point. But the answer is, Noah, that I voted for a good Republican for President of the United States. It just happened not to be Donald Trump.
Governor Asa Hutchinson, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.